Before I turn things over to Margie, I wanted to introduce myself and talk a bit about Northern Landscapes Festival as well. My name is Sarah. I work here at North House Folk School year-round as a program manager, and I get to help out with all different kinds of programs, including this week's set of events for Northern Landscapes Festival. The festival is often one of my very favorite times of year here at North House, where we gather with students from all over and get out into the field, learning about birds and lichens and ferns and all kinds of things out in the great outdoors. And because of the pandemic this year, we're not able to gather in person. So it's exciting to get to try out some of these virtual ways of learning together, even though we know that nothing can replace the in-person experiences that we were planning on having. So thanks for your willingness to try out these experiments with us, and know that we are excited to get back to our in-person classes and programming as soon as we're able to do so safely. There are some other things going on besides this webinar. So you found this webinar, which is awesome. And if you're excited about the festival, you can join us for a few other things this week. Tomorrow night at 7:30 p.m., there will be another Zoom event that's a Nature Notes check-in with one of our other instructors, Joe Valevsky. He'll be sharing a bit about how to get involved with the Bio Blitz that's going on all week this week, which is an effort through iNaturalist, which is an online website and also an app you can get on your phone, where people go out and take pictures of things they're observing in the natural world and share them with us. So if you're not in the BioBlitz yet, I encourage you to get yourself signed up and join us. I checked just before getting on this webinar, and I think we had 96 observations in the BioBlitz already. So people are getting out there and exploring and learning along the way, which is awesome. So if you're interested in getting involved in the BioBlitz, you can find information on our website. I'll post a link in the chat. And then you can also sign up to join us for that Nature Notes check-in tomorrow night. There will be another one of those on Saturday night, and then there will be a wrap-up on Sunday night, where you're invited to bring your own celebratory snack and drink as we enjoy the results of the BioBlitz. There's one more webinar scheduled this week, and that's on Friday from noon to 1, and that will be on geology with Jim Miller, who's our geology instructor here at the school, and he'll be telling the geologic story of Lake Superior and the North Shore. So it should be super fun as well. I encourage you to sign up for that one. I'll post some links in the chat for how to get to those things. So that's some advertising about the rest of the week. Without much further ado, I'm really excited that we're joined today by Margie Menzies, who is a naturalist at Sugarloaf Cove, as well as Hawk Ridge Bird Observatory down in Duluth. And we have the great pleasure of her teaching with us here at North House each year as part of the Master Naturalist class. And she, without any hesitation, said, sign me up, when I asked her if she'd be willing to try out one of these webinars. So we're so excited that she's here to share with us about birds today. And with that, I'll turn things over to you, Margie.
All right. Well, hey, everybody. Thanks for being willing to give some of your time today and step in here. I am up. Sarah, you got to enable me again. I am a novice at this webinar business, but it really helps to have at least Sarah's face there to look at as I'm working on things.
All right, you should be set now, Margie.
Okay. There we go. That's much better. All right, there we go. We got the tools going. So yeah, pardon me while I get used to the idea of talking mostly to myself, but you're all out there. So we'll get into this. Like I say, I'm a novice on this virtual webinar stuff, but we'll have fun. I can talk about birds basically anytime, anywhere. So get me going. Yeah, exploring birds through spring migration. And I have to say, migration, either spring or fall, is just one of my very, very favorite things. And birds are also one of my very favorite things. And so, hey, the combination is just amazing. As you start thinking about migration, honestly, somebody is probably migrating every hour of every day, 365 days out of the year. But we here in the Northern Hemisphere tend to think about it as something that happens in the fall or in the spring. And I, for one, am really, really, really happy with all the madness in the world right now that we are headed into spring and summer as opposed to headed into winter when all of this started. So yeah, thankfully we've got something like nature and spring happening to keep your head above water. And birds are amazing. They start the spring process of migrating amazingly early. So I think about spring migration as a very long parade and one that I watch every moment from the beginning to the end. And the other thing I'll mention is that spring migration is different than fall. It's much faster and much more in a hurry than they are in the fall. Birds in the fall can kind of gradually follow what's happening with the weather and the food sources and so forth. But in the spring, the motivation is all about nesting and making young. So it's a whole different motivation factor. Where we are, well, some of you are, many of you, I think about the Mississippi Flyway. And it's a very, very busy flyway. You can see that here in the Midwest, we kind of have a combination of places that we get birds from. We get a little bit of the Eastern Flyway as they cut across, but we also get this major, major flyway through the middle. And this graphic on the left is really interesting. When you want to follow birds, you can get really nerdy if you want to. And really nerdy is all about looking at radar. And you can actually, there can be points where there are so many birds that you can see the mass of birds on radar. Raptors tend to migrate during the day. A lot of other birds do too, but songbirds tend to migrate at night. So you can look at radar at any given moment in time. And that's what people did for this graphic on the left. They looked at radar traffic historically through a period of migration from March the 1st through July to look at where the biggest mass of birds is going. And as you can see, the biggest mass of birds is through this middle section of the continent. They followed that for 11 years, and this is the compilation. They estimate that more than 60% of the North American birds that migrate travel through the Mississippi Flyway in one form or another. So we're in the hot spot. And yeah, when you start thinking about who starts the parade, well, you know, you kind of have to think about distance here. Some birds are going long distances, and some birds are really going fairly short distances. Snow buntings, for example, the picture's up there in the upper right-hand corner. They are birds that could, depending on the year, kind of hang down here. We call the area on the North Shore the Arctic Riviera. Birds that come from the Arctic tend to hang out down here. They've migrated south from the Arctic, but they're still, and they still have taken part in a migration and gone further south. So interesting kinds of things. So in a given year, snow buntings may hang all winter if it's fairly mild. If it's not, they'll go on down to the Twin Cities or further south even into Iowa. So snow buntings may be one of the first birds that gets going, but bald eagles usually are the next one. They're both what I would call them regional migrators. They go as far as they need to. They don't really need to go, but they can and often do go further south. So yeah, the long distance migrators, they may start at the same time, but we won't see them until considerably later. So yeah, Sarah mentioned that I work for Hawk Ridge. I'm the education director there, and I am now heading into my 10th season with Hawk Ridge. And the longer I'm there, the more I learn. So let's just start with the Raptors, those bald eagles. This year, the bald eagles were moving already in mid-February. Sometimes they're a little earlier, sometimes they're a little later. It varies a bunch. And this chart, I know you probably can't read it real well, but basically what this is the raptors that we typically see in the spring in Duluth. And Duluth, by the way, is one of the hot spots for migratory raptors and birds as a whole. Again, part of that end of the Mississippi Flyway. There are other places, although not as many. There's a lot of folks that do fall migration counts, but not as many that do spring. But of the people that do spring counts, Hawk Ridge is one of the top sites along with some others. So yeah, those bald eagles get moving. And you'll notice on this graphic that there's adult and immature. And it turns out that in migration, there is an order there too. The adult birds in the springtime are going to be the first ones because they're the ones that are definitely going to try and breed in the season, and the young birds may or may not, and so they tend to come later. So if you look at the bald eagles, you'll see that the adults will start in mid to late February and go through late March, and then the juveniles will start a little bit later than that, about mid-March, and you'll notice that you'll see birds continuing to travel through the end of May, and there's more to that story. So let's go ahead and let's just introduce you to some of these raptors that are cruising through. Here's our bald eagle. So this is a very nice shot. I have a cohort at Hawk Ridge who takes amazing photos. So these raptor photos are all compliments of John Richardson, who takes amazing pictures. Here's a bald eagle coming through, and these are adults that are cruising through looking for their breeding territory. Now, the interesting thing about bald eagles is that they'll continue through, even now there's still bald eagles coming through. And some of them are adults. Well, wait a minute, you just told me that the adults come through and then the juveniles that are maybe not going to breed come later. Well, it turns out that there's some other things going on here. Here in the north, the birds can't breed until later because of the cold temperatures and the frozen water. Bald eagles' preferred food, of course, are fish, but they will partake of roadkill and other things. They're opportunists in a lot of ways, but their preferred food is fish. So they're going to wait for the waters to move a bit more and unfreeze a little bit before they get serious about breeding. So the adults that are going to breed up here come in mid to late February, set up that territory and keep going. But as it turns out, birds that bald eagles that live to the south of us have actually been at this breeding stuff much earlier. It's not unusual for bald eagles in the southern part of the states to have young in mid-February, and they've fledged by March. And okay, you're down there, say you're a bald eagle that nests on the Gulf Coast. Well, you could stay down there in the heat and humidity, or you can head north to 10,000 and more lakes and take advantage of a cooler temperature, better access to food. And so it turns out that we actually get bald eagles that have bred further south coming north just to hang out and take advantage of the opportunity because they finished everything they need to down south. I call them the tourist birds. They come and they stay through the season, and then in the fall, they are some of the first birds that we'll see migrating south in the fall, the tourist birds, because yeah, they're lightweights as well. They're not acclimatized to the intense climate up here. So interesting stuff. Who would have thunk it? Here's another bird that we see. This is another bird that comes down from the Arctic, the rough-legged hawk, and you can tell it's a rough-legged hawk because of this dark patches there on the wings. And these are birds that, yeah, they're down for the Arctic Riviera, and they may go down fairly far in the scheme of things from where they originated. They'll may go down to the Twin Cities or down to Iowa, that area. But as it gets closer to breeding season, they'll work their way up north, back. And so we'll see those. This is another gem. And if I had a live audience, I'd ask you what that is, but actually that's an adult golden eagle. Now, a lot of people think that golden eagles are primarily birds of the West, and they are to a large extent. However, there is an eastern population in northern Canada as well as a western population, and we get some of both, and we know this from bird banding data, that we actually get birds from both coming through. So here's a golden eagle for you. When you see them on the wing in the springtime, they're going to look very dark on the underside. And if you see that head, it really is kind of a burnished copper look when you see it. So those are fun to see. Red-tailed hawks come through in large numbers. The red tail isn't always as easy to see. This is a nice one, but when you're looking from underneath, sometimes that can be hard. Recognize the red-tailed hawk by the patagial patch here. That's a fancy word of saying the shoulder patch. And they always have a belly band. And the red tail, if you can see it, the other thing I look for is this comma out here on the wing. That's a good way to tell a red tail when it comes through. Turkey vultures! I love to see the turkey vultures returning in the spring. And here is a bird that we typically see most of numbers-wise in the fall and the spring. This is a broad-winged hawk. You can recognize a broad-winged hawk because their wing is pretty plain except for the edge. Right here along the edge, there's a dark edge to it. This is an adult bird because it has only one white stripe. A juvenile bird will have a number. They'll be thinner and not quite as well developed as a young bird. So we see lots and lots of broad-winged hawks, both in the fall and in the spring. And they're some of the last to come. And that's because their diet consists predominantly, believe it or not, if I were to ask you what they ate, you'd probably say, oh, mice, right? Well, actually, no, these guys are reptile and amphibian specialists. And so they come later because, yes, it's cold for a long time and the reptiles and amphibians don't come out in the spring until later. So the broad-winged hawks don't come until later. So yeah, we've had a pretty good year for raptors. Typically in the fall, Hawk Ridge will count somewhere between 20 and 30,000. This year's a little less than normal, but still not bad in the greater scheme of things. As of yesterday, there were 17,891 raptors counted. That's still a phenomenal number of birds. So I thought I'd give you a quick tour through the months. We start the counts on March the 1st every year, and the big day in March was 436 birds on March the 26th. And as you can see, there's the list of the raptors that were seen that day, 338 bald eagles. Now, that's pretty respectable, but it's nothing compared to the big day last year in March, which was March the 21st. And on that day, there were 1,076 bald eagles. Whoa, that's a big number. I was out there that day, and I remember watching the field of view and seeing birds from one end of the sky to the other. Kettle of bald eagles here, and another kettle of bald eagles there, and another kettle of bald eagles over there. At any given moment in time, you might see as many as 100 bald eagles in your binocular view at one time. That set a new North American record for the most bald eagles seen in a single day. In a single location. So it can be a phenomenal thing. This year, we've had a lot of east winds. Those of us that have been living up here along Lake Superior have been feeling that east wind straight off the lake. And it's been chilly. So when it's like that, the birds have to find alternative pathways, and they tend to go around. So that was March. April moved us into a little more diversity of birds. The bald eagles tend to kind of rule the day, and the rough-legged hawks. By early April, the red tails have joined the party. The big day in April was April the 5th, and the most birds seen that day were 785 red-tailed hawks. Busy day. So we're moving on in. The red tails are a little later. And then May, thus far, we're not quite done with May yet, but we're really kind of on the tag end of the raptor migration. Big day in May was May 5th with 955 raptors, and the king of the hill on that one were 873 broadwing hawks. And this picture on the right-hand side there is what it looks like when a kettle of rough broadwing hawks gets together. They're moving along and cruising right on through in big numbers like that. Our world record day of most broadwing hawks seen in a single day at Hawk Ridge was a day in the fall. 2003, the number was 101,700 and some odd birds and some change. We humans don't think about numbers that way very well, and to see it physically going by right in front of you is just a phenomenal sort of thing. So there we go. So yeah. But the other birds are cruising along with the raptors. But again, the differentiation here is the raptors are moving during the daytime. The other birds, most of them, at least in the passer and songbird world, are going to travel at night. It's much safer. They can make use of all sorts of things and protect themselves from the raptors during the daytime. They hole up and wait. And so the early songbirds, and again, these are birds that typically haven't gone very far. Brown creepers and kinglets, they can spend the winter here. They typically don't. They typically go a little bit further south. And then as spring progresses, we see other birds like American woodcocks coming in, white-crowned sparrows, American tree sparrows are early in the sparrow category. I love it when the first red-winged blackbirds of spring turn up and start singing.
Margie, can I ask a quick question before you go forward?
Sure.
Yeah, we had 2 questions coming in the chat. One person asked, do the raptors pass over Duluth in their migration at particular times of the day?
We say that raptors keep banker's hours. 10 to 2 is the peak time if you want to look for raptors. So they tend to, that's the best time to be looking. That's when the winds are most favorable for moving. And also late enough in the morning so that if there's going to be hot air currents that create updraft areas, there's time enough for the sun to shone long enough to develop those. In the springtime early on, there's not as much thermal traffic because, yeah, the land is covered with white and snow. And so there's not much for thermals. And so the birds have to work a little harder coming earlier. But yeah, typically 10 to 2 is the best time to be looking.
The other question was, how do you tell birds from precipitation on radar?
Yeah, well, what you want to do, and I should have put a slide in the presentation for this and I didn't. What you want to look at, Radar are set up in metropolitan areas, and if you look on a night of migration, big time migration, you will see a whole bunch of circles that are pretty much the radar range in a metro area. That doesn't look like typical fronts. Fronts are kind of irregular in shape, and the coloring is different too. A front, for example, the storm that came through here last night was very yellow and orange. The migration typically is a green and blue color. It's a lower level, but there's a lot of it. So if you look at a radar map at night during a migration period, you'll see lots of little round circles. There'll be a round circle around Des Moines, and there'll be one at Minneapolis, and there'll be another one in Duluth, and another one over in the Fargo area. And whenever there's a lot of movement, you can just look at the radar map of the country and see all these little round circles. You can start from the Gulf Coast and see them all the way north. It's fascinating. Yeah, you can geek out on birds on all kinds of crazy ways.
Thanks, Margie. Go ahead.
Yeah. So as spring progresses and the waters open up, we see some of the other kinds of birds that come through. One of my all-time favorite are the American white pelicans. A lot of these birds take advantage of the fact that Lake Superior is open even if the inland waters aren't. And so they'll travel and they'll stage on Lake Superior and hang out until the waters open. Loons in particular do this. The picture on the bottom left is a loon. It's still in winter plumage, and sometimes you'll see that yet in the spring. They haven't fully fledged and gone and molted into their breeding plumage, the traditional black with the black and white stripes. So yeah, but when you see loons coming through, they come through, they have a very fast flight, very fast and straight. And we see a lot of those. And like I say, they stage on Lake Superior, and some of them actually daily make the run to the lake that they want to call home and check the condition of the ice. Is it gone yet? Nope, not yet. Back to the big lake, because the big lake rarely freezes over. And certainly not in the late spring. So that's a fascinating thing to watch. Sandhill cranes are another of my favorite. You can always tell sandhill cranes because they got long necks and long legs. The other birds that look a lot like this are herons and egrets, but they never fly or very rarely fly with their necks out. They'll curl their necks back, and so you won't see the long neck and the long legs. The other advantage to the sandhill cranes is the sound effects that go with them. Typically they'll bugle as they fly as well, so it's always fun. So those are coming in mid to late April. And cruising on through. And back at the end of the parade, these are the birds that have come the furthest. The thrushes and the vireos and the warblers and the flycatchers. These are the birds that are primarily insect eaters. And they'll come later because they've taken a longer migration. Most of these are gonna overwinter. We call them neotropicals because they're gonna overwinter down in the Mexico, the Caribbean, even some of them as far as South America. And so they've got a longer distance to come back. That's part of the reason they're later. They may start at the same time as the bald eagles, but the bald eagles don't have to go very far. These guys, some of them, for example, the whippoorwill there may have come from Central America or further south than that. Takes them a little longer. And yeah, they need to be able to have a diet when they get to where they're going. So I'm waiting. Sugarloaf always has a whippoorwill. I haven't heard it yet this spring, but they typically arrive about this time, late May, late May and into June. So, but the hummers, they're usually about the 10th of May. It's pretty much like clockwork. It's amazing that something so tiny can be so predictable. But yep, there they are. And this year was no exception. I got up here for the first time in, let's see, I think it was the 17th of March or 17th of May for the spring, and set up the feeder that night. And they were definitely here saying, all right, where is the feeder? Come on, it's time to get going. So yeah, bringing up the rear of the migratory parade are all of these guys, as well as my all-time favorites. How well do you know your warblers? Give yourself a little quiz there. I'm not gonna make you go crazy, but yeah, there's an amazing variety. We have here at Sugarloaf over the years that we've been banding, and we'll talk more about banding here in a bit. But in the years that we've been banding, we have banded 25 different species of warblers. It's amazing. And yeah, in Minnesota, depending on where you live, down around the Twin Cities, you pick up a few that we don't have up here because they tend to stay south, like prothonotary warblers and cerulean warblers and things like that. But up here, we have greater diversity of warblers than anywhere else in the country, pretty much. This is warbler territory. And so there's part one of warblers. How you doing on your warbler ID? And on to the next half of the story, there's a second half, warblers round 2. Amazing, that number of different species of birds, and they're teeny tiny. We are starting to have leaves in the trees now, so the days of easy warbler spotting are are numbered here. We can still see them fairly well, but as the trees leaf out, they get harder and harder to see, and they don't often sit still for very long. But there they are, the warblers, and they're just getting here. It's amazing how long this year, for whatever reason, I think it's, well, partly it's all these east winds that we've had this year. That tends to put a brick wall up for birds that should be arriving here and just aren't, because they're waiting. They don't want to go much further, so they're kind of holed up down in the Twin Cities or points further south. I always say there's that brick wall down there, and it can sometimes take weeks to break it. You see reports of warblers with the bird nerds all over the place and down south, but it seems to take a couple of weeks often till they fully get up here. So we're really kind of in the back half of the migration here. So lots and lots and lots of stuff. Part of the fun of migration is banding. When you band birds in the spring and the fall, year after year after year, you sort of get an idea of the order of the parade and who's likely to be when. This is, I use a lot of tools when I'm birding. Listening to songs and calls is a good one, but banding is a wonderful way to know who's really out there in the woods. Set the nets and catch the birds and find out who's really coming through at that moment in time. So banding is an amazing way to learn about the sequencing of the birds as they move through. And we took an advantage. Sarah came down and we took advantage of doing some banding last week. And I thought that there were going to be more warblers here than there were, but there were a few. We heard a bunch as we were working. So we took the opportunity to see what was out there and give you a little bit of a treat here in the banding. And so Sarah took some lovely videos, and we set up the nets for the first time for the spring on May the 20th. And yep, the first bird in the first video we're going to show you is a common yellowthroat, first warbler of the year banded at Sugarloaf in 2020. We usually band more warblers than anything else here at Sugarloaf. So I'm gonna.
All right.
say, okay, Sarah, how about let's watch the video of banding the common yellowthroat. And yeah, I apparently wasn't very loquacious that day, so there'll be a couple of things that I'll clear up later on what I meant when I said that. We'll watch two videos here. This one, the first one is a bird that we hadn't caught before, and the second one is a bird that we had caught before, so it's a nice contrast. So we'll show you two videos, and I'll do a little bit of a little more detail on some things that I didn't talk about in the video. Yeah, I'm sure there'll be questions. So that's kind of where we're going. So let's watch.
All right. While I'm getting that pulled up, Margie, one person asked in the chat, how do you catch birds for banding, especially raptors?
Well, passerines are pretty easy. The songbirds, passerines is another way to call that. You put up nets in areas where you think they fly. Raptors, on the other hand, not the same. We'll use the same nets, a little bigger mesh, but yeah, if you want to catch a raptor, you gotta have something that makes it look like it's worth coming in there. Raptors, when they fly, many of them hunt as they migrate. And so what we use for raptors is lures that look like injured birds. And there are nets between the lures and the birds, and they don't see the net. It's pretty fine mesh. They're looking, hey, it looks like free lunches right there for the taking. But in reality, there's a net between them and the free lunch, and they don't ever get the free lunch. They wouldn't want it by the time they've come out of the net anyway, but that's how we catch the raptors, and it's a fascinating process. I tend to get raptors. I tend to band only passerines, but every now and again you get a raptor who's on the hunt, chasing a songbird, for example, and the songbird ends up in the net, and so does the raptor. So once in a while, I get an opportunity to do that. In fact, a few slides back when we were talking about the raptors, I had that picture of me holding a northern goshawk. That was one that came into the net one day, hunting something, and got a little bit more than it bargained for. So there you go.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and press play on the first video here, folks.
37 or 31, 37.5. Nothing like a pissed off red squirrel for company. I think they spend 3/4 of their lives pissed off, so it's not good for your blood pressure, dude.
Tell you what, it really gets my dog's blood pressure up. Just the sound. I mean, you could like drag him nuts. Just like
26.8. Okay. That's about right for these guys. All right. Common yellowthroat, yeah.
Look at that mask.
Yeah. Yep, there's no question that this is a boy. Yeah. Nice dark mask. And yeah, we'll see what we can do with the rest of it. Yeah, he's probably gonna be another second year from looking at things, but we'll see what we get. All right, into zero land. Okay. Now, are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
2850 52305.
Backwards. 503250582.
Yep, sounds good.
Capture time.
740. Alright, so this fella's got a band now. just straighten him out, make sure that everything is the way that it should be. It's designed so that it slides easily up and down the bird's leg. It's not tight at all. It's like a bangle bracelet. One that we hope he'll have for the rest of his life. Now I'm going to measure the wing cord, which is kind of from what we would think of as the elbow of the wing out to the end of the longest feather, which is 57. Measure the tail. 50, tail. Zero fat CP stands for Cloacal Protuberance, and this guy is proving that he is a male. He's not full bore yet, but he's swollen, which is an indication of a male. So if we didn't already have his nice black mask to tell us that he's a male in the common yellowthroats, that would have done it for sure. Let's see here. Let's go ahead and skull you. 2. Yep. Yep, he's got a 6 for a skull, which says that's fully pneumatized. In Songbirds, in the springtime, we would expect all birds to have fully pneumatized or fully completed skulls. But it turns out when they're born, they are born with a single layer that fills in with reinforcements, kind of like pillars on top of that as the bird ages. And by this time of year, after a bird was born, they should have a fully pneumatized skull. This guy does. He probably was born last summer. From the looks on his feathers, very, very definitely well tattered tail feathers, and there's growth bars all the way across. The primary coverts are slightly different colored than the coverts, and they're looking fairly pointy. So I'm quite comfortable calling this one a second-year bird as well. He was born last summer and is on his first trip back from migration. Congrats, dude, because yeah, in the migration world, the first round, up to 60% of them don't make it. So this guy has proved he's got the stuff because he's made it through that first migration round and is back on his way to his breeding ground to try his luck with the ladies. You got everything you need?
I got it. Yes.
You want to take a look at him? Just, you see those nice growth bars in there? Those are pretty obvious. And he's pretty pointy there too. He looks a nice contrast between the grayer coverts and the primaries. So yeah, quite comfortable calling you a second-year dude. All right, are you ready to go? I think so. All right, we'll aim you the other way and maybe you won't fly back into the net. Here we go, on 3. 1, 2, 3. There he goes.
All right.
First half of the story, so that was a new bird, and we had not seen that one before, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of the nitties and gritties, but I'm giving Sarah time to get the other video up.
Actually, Margie, I'm wondering if you want to go ahead and talk a bit about banding, because we're a little bit short on time, and then for
Okay.
people who want to stick around at the end, we'll show the second video once we wrap up.
Okay, sounds like a plan. Yeah, on that one, yeah, let's go ahead. I'm going to go back to my screen here, and we'll do that. There's a couple of things that I showed you in the video. All right, there we go. All right, so here was our that's not the bird that we caught, that's a different one. But we had a common yellow throat, and with birds, whenever we catch them, we try and learn as much information as we possibly can while we have them in our hands. We will weigh them. You saw me doing that at the beginning of the video. We'll make measurements on the wing, sometimes the tail, not always. And then we'll put a band size on correct for that bird. This bird is quite small, and so it gets the size 0, which is not the smallest. We have a 0A, which is actually a little smaller. And by the way, the person that was helping me in the video there, in addition to Sarah doing the camera, is Joe Lutz, and he's been helping out with the banding here at Sugarloaf for a number of years, and I wouldn't be able to get along without him. So I was very grateful for him being there that day to help out, because when you're banding, it really, really, really helps to have someone keeping track of all of the things. You want to make sure that you get all the information taken care of. And I'm infamous for when I get started talking to people and educating, I forget things. And so it's the job of the scribe to make sure you do all of those things and get all of the pieces parts. You saw I might have looked like I was some alien from outer space. That headset is as magnifying, so it allows me to read those teeny tiny little bands that have 9 digits on them. It helps to have magnification to do that. It also helps to look at some of the small details that are on the birds, the molts and things like that. So yeah, there's a bunch of different kinds of things. Okay, it did this to me this morning too. It doesn't want to advance the slide. Come on, wake up.
While you're getting that going, Margie, there's a question here from a viewer. They're asking, when you catch the bird to band as they're migrating, do they get separated from their flock? Also, has anyone done a study on whether those birds experience trauma from being caught, even if it's just temporary?
Yeah, classic questions. In the springtime during migration, warblers in particular tend to travel in mixed flocks, and sometimes you get the whole flock in the net, which is fascinating and exciting because you begin to get to see who all is traveling together. When they land in the nets, it's kind of, I always say that it's a lot like the safety nets underneath the high wire act. It supports all of the weight of the bird, and so there's almost never injuries to the birds when they're caught. Yeah, they'll be stressed for a little bit. I sort of liken it, you know, when you're an educator, you do a lot of analogies, and I typically liken getting caught and banded as a bird to going to the doctor. Yeah, they may do a couple of things that you don't really care for. You don't really like hanging out at the doctor's or the dentist, but you tolerate it, you do it, and when it's over with, you forget about it and go on about your business. And I think for birds, that's fairly similar to what that's like. But yeah, since I'm not a bird, I can't know that for certain, but we do know that we've been banding birds for more than 100 years and continue to catch and recatch them over and over again. And so we know the birds are fine. So yeah, it's a minor stress, but the majority of birds do just fine. And as banders, we have special training in a lot of areas. And one of the areas is recognizing when a bird is stressed, and things that you'll see, they'll poof up all their feathers or they'll close their eyes. And when you start seeing that kind of behavior in a bird, more often than not, an experienced bander is just going to let that bird go and stop the whole process. So good questions. So the second video is all about a black-capped chickadee, and that's a recaptured bird. And if we get a chance to watch that one, we will. But recaptures are ways that we learn a lot about birds. We gain additional information, and chickadees are fascinating. And the one that we caught this time around actually was a female bird. And during the springtime and summer is really the only time that you can sex a chickadee. One of the things that we do for every bird is age and sex it For a common yellowthroat, easy peasy, because the adult male looks very different than the adult female. Not the case in chickadees. The males and females look exactly alike. So the female chickadee that we caught that day had a lovely brood patch. So I want to show you some of the things that we use to do this stuff. Sculling. I was doing that in the video, and I said, okay, I'm going to skull this bird. And it sounds sinister, but it's actually really more like giving you a bad hair day. I use a little bit of water to dampen the feathers on the top of the bird's head, and the bird skin is fairly clear, and so I can look through and I can see what the flesh, what the skull looks like underneath. When they're first born, this will be largely all pink. And as the bird gets older, the skull will start to develop, and these little spickles around the outside are like those little columns that I talked about in the presentation. And by the time the bird's a full adult, usually it takes most birds 5, 6, 8 months to get a fully pneumatized skull. In the spring, they're generally done. Some birds may have just a little space down at the back that never fills in completely. A couple of the thrushes do that. But in general, most birds are going to look very speckled white. I always think this drawing has it backwards. The white in this case means pink, and the black means it's mostly a speckled white that you see. So when I'm sculling, I'm looking at that on the bird's skull to see if it's fully developed. And this time of year, you fully expect to see all of them that way. When we start catching young birds, end of June, beginning of July, then we'll see those red patches when we're looking. Cloacal protuberance, yes, indeed. In the springtime, for birds, they do swell up. The cloaca for a bird is the out. They've got a mouth. Everything that comes in goes in the in box and comes out the out box. And that includes fecal material, but it also includes sperm. And so a male bird develops what we call a cloacal protuberance. And you can see we always rate a cloacal protuberance about not at all, and this is what it would look like. It's broader at the base and narrower at the top, but it's broader at the base than it's than this other end, and so you can say that's kind of the beginning, and that's what I was seeing in that common yellowthroat. And when it's fully developed, you will see broader at the top and narrower at the bottom. And so this is typically what we're looking for. And yes, for birds, it'll stay that way for the male through the entire breeding season. So it can be a couple of months like that for some birds. So it helps us determine males from females. The brood patch, birds ordinarily have lots and lots and lots of feathers on their bellies, but the feathers here are starting to go, and this is fully emptied, and it'll be a big bare pink belly that you'll see, and that'll tell us in a lot of cases that it's a female bird. Now, there are a couple of birds where there's equal opportunity, and the males will develop a partial brood patch, and the partial brood patch will be seen, and it's not as fully developed as this, but it'll still be a bare patch on the belly. And some of the birds that do that, nuthatches do that, so do woodpeckers. So yeah, that's something else to be watching for when you're banding. So yeah, why do we do this? What do we learn from bird banding? Well, things like, do the birds stay in one area? For example, because we've been banding here at Sugarloaf now coming up on 9 years, we have a pretty solid record of who lives here and who comes back year after year. And some of these birds, oh my goodness, we have alder flycatchers that winter in South America and they come back every year. We have one that was 6 years old, 6 and 7 years old. They've come back. And just the idea of something so tiny, traveling such amazing distances and coming back all in one piece to the exact same place in the exact same net in a lot of cases year after year is just that's a mind blower. So yeah, do they stay in one area? How long do they live? Where do they travel? If somebody else catches a bird, they can, for example, if we banded a bird at Sugarloaf and it turns up in St. Louis 2 days later, wow, that's pretty impressive travel. How long does it take them to get there? Who's resident? Who's here during the summertime, during the breeding season? Who is just a migrant that comes in early spring or comes in late summer? Do bird populations change? I had a few years back, where I was wondering about the red-breasted nuthatch, because I'd had a nice healthy population, and then suddenly I had a year where I caught only one. And I'm like, uh-oh, what's happening? Took a couple of years, but now the population is back to where it was before. So we can learn things like that and begin to try and find some answers. How many survive their first year, migrate, and return back to nest in the same area? Usually the adults will kick them out and tell them you can't nest here, you have to find your own territory. So there's that, but all kinds of things that we can learn. So yeah, all for the love of birds. You can bird nerd from here to there and everywhere and learn all kinds of stuff. Take some time. If you're stuck at home, figure out who's traveling through, who lives there all the time. If you really want to be a better birder, learn their songs and who belongs to which one. I love this because, yeah, it's a puzzle every year to see what's going on. And I did want to throw a couple of resources out there. Sugarloaf Cove, we band every summer, once a week, and can keep track of that. We've got now 9 years worth of data. Hawk Ridge Bird Observatory, that's a fun site. We count everything, including the raptors. I kind of highlighted the raptors, but you can go on our website there and actually get up to the moment updates on what they're seeing on a particular day, raptors and non-raptors alike. All About Birds is a great spot to go and get more information about individual species of birds. And eBird, I put that on there. eBird is a wonderful tool that you can become a citizen scientist and log the birds that are in your area. And you can also learn more about who's in your area when. There's great options in there. For example, when I was preparing for this, I was going into Cook County and looking. They have bar graphs of who comes when from all of the citizen scientists reporting data that comes from this area year after year. So with that, I will turn it over to questions.
All right. Margie, we've got a question in the chat here. Someone asks, if one of your banded birds is netted far away from northern Minnesota, how do the people who caught it get the info from the band?
Good question. So much information and so little time. All of the banding that's done in North America is managed by an agency called the Bird Banding Lab. And in order to band, you have to have a permit from the Bird Banding Lab, and all of the bands come from there. And part of a bander's job is, once you've banded all your birds, every year you get to sit down and enter a lot of data on the computer, so the banding lab has an up-to-date record of all the birds that have been banded. So if someone else somewhere catches a bird, and even you, if you live in a house and a bird hits your window and crashes and has a band, you too can go onto the bird banding website and log in what you know about the bird, and they will send you a report about where the bird was banded, all the information that they have. And they'll also send a record to the person who banded the bird. I had a bird that was recovered. I'm seeing a lot of blue jays galore at my feeders, and I had banded a second year blue jay, and it was later recovered in Iowa. So yeah, we know that blue jay traveled. Blue jays can stay for the winter, or they can go south, and this particular one went south. So that's how we learn more about those birds, and how someone far away can get that information. They send it right straight into the banding lab, and they'll send the information back. So both the bander and the person who got the bird both get information. Pretty cool.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to thank folks for joining us for the webinar. If you have to head out, feel free to do so. And please do join us for other events later in the week. If you'd like to stick around, I'm going to go ahead and share that second video now. So for folks who are able to stick around, we'll just watch that second video and then have a little bit of a few minutes after that if there are more questions. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now.
So 39, 40.1. So much for mellow. Now we're into the other half of the spectrum. Warblers are always so nice and mellow. 27.7. That is easier. I like that. Join that party. I gotta find some bowls. There we go. All right. That's about right for those guys too. 11 or 12 is pretty standard weight for a chickadee. That's who we have here, and he's one of our old friends. This bird is a recapture. Yeah, if you don't have any doubt that it's a chickadee, they'll start to bite and peck at you the moment you get them out of the bag. Good for being feisty. So let's go ahead and give you a band number. Okay. 2780. 15730. Give it back to me just to be sure I got it. Yeah.
03751 0872.
Good. All right. Excellent. $63 on the wing. 61 on the tail. Chickadees are often really hard to age. Those are looking, they're soggy, so that adds to the intrigue. All right, this one has a brood patch. Let's see if we can show you. This one's a mama. I don't know how close I could get. See that big bare belly? Can you see it?
Yeah, do it one more time.
That says this one's got eggs, so we're gonna hurry up and get her done so we can get her out of here. She's got eggs, or at least she had eggs. She may have youngins by now.
Brood patch is what?
I will give this one a 3. And a fully pneumatized skull. Miracle on the chickadees that you can see it. But yeah, fat 0. She'd be busy. Yeah. I'm gonna call her after hatch year because chickadees are hard to age in general, but this one is particularly so. So, we know that she wasn't born this year. It's too early for young from this year's hatch. So that much we know, which is why we're giving her the after hatch year title. That says we know she wasn't born between January and now, but she definitely could have been born last summer or before that. We can look back at our previous records and we might be able to have better information, because we banded this bird last year, I think, and we can look in last year's stuff and see if we were able to determine age. Probably not sex, depending on when we banded her. So yeah, we're learning more about this bird since she's come back for another visit. All right, anything else we need?
Got it.
That's it. All right, let's do it. Ready? Oh yeah. Good.
Awesome. All right, we had a few more questions come in while that video was playing, Margie. One person asked, does anyone count or try to band crows and ravens?
Absolutely. Yeah, the Hawk Ridge counters will count all the crows and ravens that are actually migrating through. We often get asked, how can you tell? Well, a lot of it has to do with their behavior. When they're cruising around as a resident in the neighborhood, they'll buzz all around. Birds that are migrating tend to be going. Heading north, thank you very much. I'll wave as I go by, but I'm not gonna stop and explore. So yeah, they do count those. And there are researchers that work with ravens and crows. We occasionally catch them at Hawk Ridge as accidents with the raptor banding. And so yeah, I will tell you that they are not particularly lovely to handle. They're very feisty birds and very smart. The corvids are the birds that really have the highest intelligences. So yeah, they can be an adventure to work with.
All right, someone else asked, and I happen to know this person lives in Grand Marais, so they said, we had a varied thrush in our side woods for several weeks. How does a bird lose its way so dramatically? Don't they usually live in the Pacific Northwest?
Yeah, weather can do all kinds of crazy things, and storms can blow birds off course. Varied thrush turn up fairly regularly in Minnesota. And it's partly weather that blows them in, and partly they're just birds that are a bit of a wanderer to start with. We have some like that. Here at Sugarloaf, maybe every third or fourth year, I'll see a northern mockingbird. They don't live here, but they'll wander through and they'll hang out for a day or two and then go on their merry way. Why they actually do that, we don't necessarily know for sure, but we do know that varied thrushes do that. So yeah, varied thrushes, mockingbirds, a few other birds. But yeah, it's not unusual too for a bird to temporarily take up refuge because they've been blown off course, and then they can maneuver themselves back. It's amazing. There's fascinating research on birds that can find their way back to exactly where they came from.
Great. There's one more question I see here, and Nancy asks, are there bird banding training classes that are offered?
Yeah, there are. In order to band, you really have to have a lot of training. You spend a lot of time working with an established bander, but there are classes. The Institute for Bird Populations does classes typically every summer here in the North Country at Wolf Ridge. They won't be this summer because of the conditions that we're working under, but typically every summer there are banding classes for beginning banders and advanced banders there. So if it's something that you're interested in getting involved with, best strategy is find someone who's banding in the area that you live, see if you can get to know them, spend some time working with them. It generally takes a long time to get yourself up to speed to get a permit to band. So yeah, there are courses.
All right. Well, I think those are all the questions that I saw. So I wanted to thank everyone once again for joining us for the webinar, and thanks to those of you stuck around here for the final bits. Once again, there are more events going on this week for Northern Landscapes Festival. You can check them all out on our website. If you go to northhouse.org, right on the homepage, they're advertised there, and you can click through to sign up. There'll be an event tomorrow evening, a Nature Notes check-in, another webinar Friday, noon to 1 on geology, and then Saturday night and Sunday night, we have Nature Notes check-ins and wrap-up of the BioBlitz that's ongoing all week, which you can also find out about on the website. So thank you so much, Margie. That was a wonderful presentation. Great turnout here in the audience. And thanks, folks, for attending. We'll see you all later.
Yes, thanks everybody. And yeah, I should have been teaching Master Naturalist class, so look for that next year too.
All righty. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.